My neighbor set my house on fire because I refused to join his so-called community. I know that sounds unbelievable, almost like something ripped out of a crime drama, but it happened to me, in a place where I thought I was safe. Imagine waking up one morning expecting routine, only to find your entire world engulfed in flames because you said no to the wrong person. This isn't just a story about property or loss. It's about how quickly ordinary life can turn upside down when control and obsession collide. And here's the thing. It didn't start with fire. It started with something much smaller, almost harmless. A neighbor knocking on my door with what seemed like friendly intentions. A casual invitation. A smile that felt genuine at first. Who would ever think that refusing a simple offer could spiral into something so extreme? But that's the trap. The little moments that don't look dangerous until you see them in hindsight. Please sit with that for a moment. How many times in your own life have you brushed off someone's persistence, assuming it was nothing? How often have you ignored that uneasy feeling in your gut because it seemed easier than confrontation? I did the same, and the cost was more than I ever imagined. So let me take you back to the beginning. Before the smoke, before the sirens, before the night I stood helplessly watching everything I built burn down. Let me show you how a quiet neighborhood, a pushy invitation, and a refusal to conform can ignite into a nightmare no one should have to endure. Because once you hear how this unfolded, you'll never look at just a neighborly request the same way again. I used to think of my neighborhood as ordinary, the kind of place where nothing dramatic ever really happens. The streets were quiet, the lawns were neatly trimmed, and the most exciting thing might have been a garage sale down the block. It was the sort of environment that gave you the illusion of peace, the sense that life here would always be predictable. And maybe that's why what followed felt so jarring, because it shattered the picture-perfect calm I had convinced myself was permanent. It all began with Mr. Johnson, the neighbor who lived just a few doors down. At first glance, he seemed like the type of person every community needs, energetic, welcoming, always eager to bring people together. He had this almost magnetic enthusiasm about him, the kind that made you feel like you were missing out on something if you weren't part of whatever he was planning. He called it his community group, a space where neighbors could connect, share resources, and look out for one another. On paper, that sounds like a beautiful idea. Who doesn't want to belong to something bigger than themselves? But there was something about his eagerness that never sat quite right with me. Have you ever met someone whose smile felt just a little too wide? Whose generosity seemed a little too rehearsed? That was Mr. Johnson. He would drop by uninvited, standing on my doorstep with homemade flyers or baked goods, speaking with the kind of urgency that made declining feel almost rude. At first, I brushed it off as quirky friendliness, the sort of harmless persistence you might expect from a neighborhood organizer. But deep down, I felt a twinge of unease that I couldn't fully explain. Looking back, I realized those early interactions were red flags I chose to ignore. The way he leaned just a little too close when making his pitch. The way he spoke about the group not as an option, but as an expectation. The way his visits blurred the line between hospitality and intrusion. These weren't isolated moments, they were patterns. And yet, I told myself it was nothing, that he was simply passionate about building community. It's easy to rationalize odd behavior when you don't want conflict. What I didn't know then was that those subtle signals, the ones I dismissed, were only the beginning. His warmth wasn't really warmth. It was control disguised as kindness. And by the time I recognized how deeply that control mattered to him, it was already too late. At first, I told myself that Mr. Johnson's persistence was just a phase, that if I politely declined enough times, he would eventually lose interest. But that's not what happened. Instead, his efforts doubled. It started with the occasional knock on the door, but soon it became an almost daily ritual. He would show up uninvited, arms full of pamphlets or homemade food, launching into rehearsed speeches about how much I was missing out by not being part of his group. What struck me wasn't just the frequency of these visits, it was the pressure behind them, the subtle guilt woven into every conversation. He would say things like, "We're all in this together, and when you're not part of us, it hurts the whole community." Or, "You'll regret it later when you see how connected we all are." Those words were designed to manipulate, to make me question my decision, to make me feel selfish for wanting my own space. And for a while, they worked. I was second-guessing, wondering if I was being too distant, and if joining might make life easier. But the unease never left, and that unease was my compass. When guilt didn't sway me, he turned to bribes. Suddenly, there were promises of exclusive events only members could attend, mysterious perks that sounded vague but enticing. He even offered me free goods, food, furniture, services, anything to lure me in. It wasn't generosity. It was bait, and I could feel the strings attached. Every time I refused, the smile on his face grew tighter, the pauses between his words longer. There was something behind his eyes I didn't like, something that told me this wasn't about community. It was about control. The emotional toll began to creep in. I found myself dreading the sound of footsteps on my porch, anxious whenever I saw his figure crossing the street toward my house. I started avoiding my own front yard, living as if I were under surveillance. It's strange how quickly peace can erode when someone decides your boundaries don't matter. You tell yourself it's harmless, but your body knows better. Your heart rate quickens, your breath shortens, and a subtle layer of fear begins to coat everything. I tried to rationalize his behavior, to give him the benefit of the doubt, but deep down I knew this wasn't normal neighborly persistence. It was harassment dressed up as friendliness. And here's the thing. When someone repeatedly refuses to respect your no, what they're really saying is that your autonomy doesn't count, that they're entitled to your time, your choices, even your life. That realization made me uneasy in ways I didn't yet have words for. At this point, I should have known things would spiral. All the signs were there, the manipulation, the bribes, the constant pressure that turned my home from a place of rest into a battlefield of unwanted encounters. But I underestimated how far he was willing to go. I thought ignoring him would make him give up. Instead, my silence seemed to fuel him, as if every refusal was a challenge he needed to overcome. I didn't realize it then, but the real danger wasn't in the invitations themselves, it was in what rejecting them awakened in him. There came a point when I realized I couldn't keep sidestepping or politely dodging Mr. Johnson anymore. His persistence had worn me thin, and every encounter felt like an invasion. So one afternoon when he appeared at my door yet again with that rehearsed smile and another invitation, I drew a line. I told him clearly, without hesitation, that I wasn't interested in his group, that I didn't want any more visits, and that I needed him to respect my space. For the first time, I thought I saw the mask slip. The grin froze for a second too long, his eyes hardened, and the air between us felt heavier than before. That was the moment I expected things to end, the way rejection usually ends, with an awkward nod, maybe a little hurt, but acceptance. Instead, what I got was something darker. His charm didn't fade gradually. It vanished all at once, replaced by a coldness that unsettled me to my core. The man who once seemed enthusiastic about neighborhood gatherings now gave off an energy that felt almost predatory. It was the kind of silence you don't forget, the type that speaks louder than words. After that day, he stopped knocking, but his presence lingered in ways that were just as unnerving. I'd catch him standing at the edge of his yard, staring in my direction longer than anyone should. He started making offhand remarks when we crossed paths, little jabs disguised as small talk. Some people just don't care about community. He'd mutter loud enough for me to hear. Other times it was a sarcastic, "Must be nice thinking you're above the rest of us." Those comments might sound petty, but when paired with the intensity of his glare, they carried an edge of resentment that unsettled me more than his previous pushiness ever had. The shift was impossible to ignore. What once felt like persistence now felt like punishment, a subtle retaliation for daring to say no. And that's the part that haunted me. Why did my refusal matter so much to him? Why was my absence from his group such a personal offense that it changed the way he looked at me? I had the uneasy sense that I'd touched a nerve I didn't even know existed, and that realization gnawed at me. Looking back, this was the point where I should have trusted my instincts, where I should have recognized that his silence wasn't relief, but calculation. At the time, I wanted to believe the worst was over, that by shutting the door, I had locked him out of my life. But in reality, I had only escalated something I didn't understand. I didn't know that my no wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark. And the fire it lit inside him would eventually consume far more than I could have imagined. It happened in a way you never expect, suddenly, violently, and without any chance to prepare. One moment, I was asleep in the safety of my own home, and the next, I was waking to the deafening wail of sirens and the acrid sting of smoke filling my lungs. At first, I couldn't process it. My mind scrambled to make sense of what was happening. Was this a nightmare? A false alarm? But as I stumbled toward the window, the glow of flames tearing through the walls I had built with my own hands left no room for denial. My house was burning, and with it, the life I thought was secure was unraveling in real time. There's a particular kind of fear that only comes when you realize you're powerless against something bigger than yourself. Watching fire devour what took years to create is a helplessness that words barely capture. I remember the frantic rush outside, the neighbors gathering, the chaos of voices overlapping with the crackle of destruction. I felt stripped bare, not just of my possessions, but of the illusion that I was safe in my own home. Imagine standing in the street in nothing but what you managed to grab in seconds, knowing that everything else, every photo, every memory-laden object, every piece of stability was turning to ash behind you. It's not just a loss. It's exposure. And then, amid the panic, came the detail that still chills me more than the flames themselves. Across the street, beyond the crowd of horrified faces, stood Johnson. He wasn't rushing forward, he wasn't shouting for help, he wasn't even pretending to share in the chaos. He was just there, arms folded, watching with a stillness that didn't belong to the moment. I caught his eyes for the briefest second, and something about that look told me this wasn't a surprise for him. It was satisfaction. And in that instant, 1,000 slight suspicions came together with crushing clarity. It's difficult to describe the storm of emotions that realization created. Fear and grief tangled with anger in ways that made it hard even to breathe. I couldn't say anything then, not to him, not to anyone, because the disbelief was too overwhelming. How could someone I once shook hands with, someone who once spoke about community and belonging, be standing there like a spectator at my ruin? But the evidence of his demeanor was impossible to ignore. That night, I lost more than just my house. I lost the comfort of believing that evil only lives in distant places, far from our own neighborhoods. The days that followed blurred into endless questions, investigations, and the hollow ache of displacement. Police combed through the wreckage, neighbors gave their statements, and the story slowly pieced itself together. What emerged was something more disturbing than I had even imagined. Johnson's motive was as petty as it was monstrous. He hadn't burned my house because of money, or because of some feud over property lines, but because I had refused to join his community group. My no, the simple assertion of my own boundaries, had been enough to ignite his resentment into an act of calculated revenge. Think about that for a moment. To him, my refusal wasn't just personal, it was intolerable. In his mind, it wasn't enough for me to live peacefully. I had to conform, to submit, to join. And when I didn't, he saw it as an attack on the identity he had built around power and control. This is the part that unsettles us the most as human beings. Realizing that the people who smile at us across the street might be harboring darkness we can't see until it erupts. As the investigation tightened around him, the shock shifted into outrage. Neighbors who once found him charming now looked at him with disgust. The facade had cracked wide open, and the truth spilled out for everyone to witness. For me, there was a grim sense of vindication. Not joy, not triumph, but the cold recognition that my instincts had been right all along. And though no justice could restore the home I had lost, the fact that he was exposed meant he could no longer harm others under the pretense of friendship. Standing there, watching the remnants of my life being hauled away in blackened fragments, I felt something shift inside me. Loss has a way of clarifying who you are and what truly matters. I realized that while Johnson had succeeded in destroying my house, he hadn't killed me. If anything, he had forced me to confront the fragility of comfort and the importance of resilience. Because here's the truth. What defines us isn't what we lose, but how we rise after the fire. and maybe that's the part of the story that matters most. The flames took wood and stone, but they also burned away illusions about safety, about appearances, about people who insist they know what's best for you. In the end, Johnson was left with nothing but his own hatred exposed. I was left with the painful but powerful knowledge that sometimes saying no is the bravest choice we can make, even when it comes with unimaginable cost. The night of the fire bled into morning with a strange quiet, the kind of silence that follows catastrophe, where every sound feels muted, unreal. Johnson didn't get to linger long in that silence. The police closed in, handcuffs snapping around his wrists, and for the first time since he moved into the neighborhood, his mask was gone. There was no charming neighbor, no friendly host, just a man exposed, dragged away. At the same time, the community watched in stunned disbelief. You would think that moment alone might have brought me comfort, but standing there with nothing but smoke-stained clothes and ashes where my home once stood, I felt no victory. Justice was happening, yes, but it couldn't replace what I had lost. The days after his arrest were some of the hardest of my life. Insurance paperwork, endless questions from investigators, the overwhelming reality of being displaced. These became my new regular. And in those moments, I learned something that no neighborly barbecue or polite wave across the street had ever taught me. Who truly cared? A few people showed up not with words but with action, offering me a couch to sleep on, bringing food, sitting with me in silence when I couldn't find the energy to speak. Those were the ones who mattered, the ones who didn't need a community group to prove loyalty. They gave freely not because it gained them influence, but because compassion asked nothing in return. But I also saw the other side, and it was sobering. People I thought were friends kept their distance. Some whispered about how I should have just gone along with Johnson's group, as if compliance could have prevented madness. Others seemed almost annoyed at the inconvenience, more concerned about gossip than about the reality of someone losing everything. That contrast cut deeply because it showed me how fragile certain connections really are. Sometimes tragedy doesn't just take your possessions, it strips away illusions about the people around you. Rebuilding was not just about lumber and nails. It was about rebuilding my own sense of safety and self. Nights were hardest, when I lay awake replaying the flames in my mind, asking myself if I could have prevented any of it. But each time I returned to the same truth. Saying no to Johnson was never wrong. Boundaries are not acts of aggression, they are acts of survival. And while my house could be burned, my integrity could not. That realization became the cornerstone of my recovery. Watching Johnson's trial unfold was both painful and necessary. His arrogance crumbled under evidence, his manipulations exposed. There was relief in knowing that he wouldn't terrorize another neighbor, but even more than that, there was strength in recognizing that I had stood firm. It wasn't just about surviving his revenge, it was about refusing to let fear rewrite who I was. And as I slowly began rebuilding, plank by plank, I carried with me a new clarity. A home is not only made of walls, but of courage, truth, and the people who stand with you when everything else falls apart. Looking back on everything that happened, the lesson that stands out most clearly is the importance of boundaries. Saying no isn't just a refusal. It's an assertion of who you are, a declaration that your life, your choices, and your home are yours to protect. It's tempting to give in to pressure, to avoid conflict, to keep the peace at the expense of your own comfort or safety. But the truth is, yielding to manipulation rarely brings safety. It brings control to someone else and quietly erodes your sense of self. Recognizing that early, and acting on it even when it's uncomfortable, is the key to preserving both dignity and security. Equally important is valuing genuine relationships over superficial connections. In the wake of the fire, I discovered who truly cared. Neighbors who showed up without expectation, friends who offered support without judgment. Those who sought control or conformity drifted away, revealing the emptiness behind their smiles. It's a challenging but necessary revelation. The people who matter are those who respect your autonomy, not those who try to dictate it. Understanding that difference can prevent future harm and foster a sense of community that is authentic, supportive, and nurturing. I invite you to reflect on your own experiences. Have you ever dealt with neighbors, colleagues, or even friends who tried to control or manipulate you? How did you respond, and what did you learn about asserting your boundaries? Drop your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you navigated difficult situations and what lessons you've carried forward. Sharing our experiences not only empowers us, but also strengthens the community around us, reminding us that we're not alone in facing challenges of influence and pressure. Finally, if you found this story meaningful or want to explore more experiences with controlling communities, check out my other videos where I break down similar real-life conflicts and the lessons they hold. Remember, standing your ground may feel risky in the moment. Still, it's the foundation for long-term resilience, genuine connection, and the courage to live life on your terms. Never underestimate the strength that comes from protecting your space, your values, and yourself.